This is Our Voices. I'm Mario Trimble. In order to be a place where everyone in our community feels valued and connected, we first have to ensure everyone believes they belong. These are Our Voices, a joint podcast production from the Colorado and Denver Bar Association's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Joint Steering Committee. Our Voices shines a light on the unique stories, experiences, and backgrounds of our member leaders so that we can help each other walk together. Hannah Proff is a criminal defense lawyer with over 10 years of practical and policy experience. She has received numerous awards and other recognition over her career for her excellence in criminal defense and juvenile rights advocacy in particular, including Lyric, Learn Your Rights in the Community, the groundbreaking nonprofit she co-founded to educate young people about their rights and interactions with law enforcement. Spend 5 minutes with her, though, and you will realize that Hannah Proff is so much more than that. A neurodiverse learner who proudly embraces her own dyslexia. Hannah's passion for criminal defense sprang from an early school trip to an under-construction prison in her native Seward, Alaska. On this episode of Our Voices, our own Mallory, Revel, and Bonnie Schriner sit down with Hannah Proff to hear the story of her path so far in her own words.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast today, Our Voices. I'm Mallory Revel, a criminal defense attorney with Foster, Graham, Milstein, and Kalisher. I'm here with my co-host today, Bonnie Schriner with Schriner Law. And we are thrilled to be meeting with Hannah Proff. Hannah is the founder and owner of Proff Law, a co-founder of Learn Your Rights in Colorado. She was in my Colorado Bar Association leadership training program class and has done many wonderful things in our community, including being a leader in pro bono work. So we are thrilled to be here with Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me, Mallory and Bonnie. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. So let's jump right in, Hannah. We want to talk to you a little bit today about a number of things, but let's start with who you were. Tell us a little bit about growing up.
Of course. So I started my journey a long way from Denver. I grew up in Alaska, a small town on the southern coast of Alaska called Seward. For the history buffs, it's Seward's Folly is the history of that name. Seward was a coal town in the 70s, and then in the early 80s, that sort of ended. And the town received the contract to build Alaska's largest maximum security prison. And so when I was born in 1982 in this town. Actually, one of the last years they delivered babies in this town. A few years later, that you had to start leaving town to have a baby delivered. So one of the last generations of people actually born in Seward, Alaska. And so they started building this prison. And as my parents tell it, I was obsessed with the prison, and I remember that. I just, who's going to be there? How do they get there? Who decides that they go there? How long do they stay? I mean, just any question you could come up with about prisons, I had them. We visited the prison before, obviously, inmates were inside, and, I think other kids were kind of running around and just playing, and, oh, look, a gym, and, oh, look, isn't this cool? And I was sort of measuring the windows with my fists and kind of imagining what it was like to be in a cell and asking all of these very carceral questions about kind of the prison industrial complex. Clearly didn't know that language as a young person. So my parents are both eventual high school graduates. They weren't definitely not college educated when I was growing up. My mother did go back and get her bachelor's degree around the same time I did, which I'm very proud of. But I grew up my dad was a ship captain and a government employee, and sort of getting a job where you could have a pension and work for the government was sort of what was, modeled for me. I think that there was only one lawyer in Seward, and he didn't live there full time. There is a magistrate, and I actually tried to Google this morning whether or not Magistrate Peck was a lawyer. I know some places that you can be a magistrate without being a lawyer. So there was a magistrate. He unicycled around town. But other than that, I didn't know any lawyers. So there are no lawyers in my family. I didn't grow up with any lawyers. And so when I had this young obsession with the carceral state, I wasn't sort of understanding that I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. I didn't have that vocabulary, candidly. But when my parents sort of suggested that I would probably want to be a detective based on my obsession with crime, I was horrified. Like, I don't want to be a detective. That's not the point here. I want to be on the side of the people who go into the prison. And my parents were both sort of like, hopefully she'll outgrow this. So here we are, 30 years later,
outgrown it.
Living the dream, right? So that's sort of where I come from. I graduated from Seward High School, and then I got out of there. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I went back a few summers ago only because it was my husband's 50th state. He hadn't been there yet, and I wanted to help him with that goal. But I always say, unless like my sister's kids or my godkids, somebody like desperately needs me to be in Alaska, I've had my 18 years was long enough for me.
Are your parents still in Alaska then?
No,
okay.
They're not. Yeah, they left after my sister got out of high school and pretty much relocated to Hawaii full time. Yeah.
So the two extremes there.
Yeah, Hawaii and Alaska are a lot closer than you think. The map makes it look so far away, but it's actually a pretty quick flight over the water there to get to Hawaii. There's a lot of deals. You can imagine Alaskans love Hawaii for understandable reasons.
You get to visit them in Hawaii very often or not?
I haven't been there in a while. My dad is really leaning on me right now, but I'm so nervous now that they've reopened. But I haven't traveled since COVID. I'm pretty anxious about it. The idea of an 8-hour flight with a mask on sounds like a nightmare to me. So I do, in normal times, I get there to visit, usually over Thanksgiving.
Continuing with growing up, I know that you are a neurodiverse learner. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Of course. So I'm dyslexic, neurodiverse learner. I'm very proud of my dyslexia, but it took me a long time to get there. I'll tell you, first of all, in the early 80s in rural Alaska, they weren't diagnosing dyslexia. I don't want to say they didn't understand dyslexia. I don't know that. They surely didn't know enough to diagnose me with dyslexia. When I was having a very hard time grasping phonics, grasping letter evaluation and symbol recognition. I remember Asteroid, the alien, would bring letters to kindergarten class, and everyone else seemed to get it. And I was like, A, Asteroid brought an A, and I was just really not connecting the dots with, I could kind of say my ABCs, but it was more of a rote song to me than like recognizing letters, which I now understand is part of my symbol and learning disability, and just how my brain works. But the school district's response in Alaska was to sort of suggest that I go into special education and take kind of an alternative route and be outside of the normal classroom a huge amount of time. And I don't want to say anything. Special education is wonderful, and especially now for neurodiverse learners, having some targeted help is amazing. But they were more wanting to kind of remove me from the normal classroom and put me onto a whole different track. And my parents, really fought for me to stay in the classroom. And eventually we went to other states for a short amount of time. And I had some, tutelage, and I learned to read. And really that was a breakthrough moment for me because I learned to read much later. I find myself often at kind of back in the day before when we had dinner parties and things like that, people either saying their kids were reading books at 3 or saying they read books at 4. And I always pipe up with, well, I didn't really read until I was 7. So, it all works out, right? And I read more than most people. I think I just finished my 58th book since March during COVID.
Oh my gosh.
I love to read. I clearly read all day as a lawyer. So once I figured it out, I really got it. Don't get me wrong. I have moments where my dyslexia have really bad days. I have some things that I do to help me kind of refocus if I'm having a day. I also have just a really hard time with spelling and with numbers. My family, people who know me really well, will laugh, if I text an address. I'll like look down later at the text chain and my husband will be like, I think she meant 119, not 116. And my sister will be like, yeah, it's 116. Hannah dyslexicked it, right? Like, people react. And similarly, there have been moments I've even been in the courtroom, right, where I continually get a number wrong and an officer or someone. And I will just, say if it's the right time, not in front of a jury, like, I'm sorry, I'm neurodiverse, I'm dyslexic, and I have a really hard time with numbers sometimes if I'm fatigued. It took me a really long time to get there. My spelling is also not amazing. My husband actually has this joke. He has a list on his phone of all the different ways I've spelled cauliflower, which, believe it or not, there's a lot of different ways one can spell cauliflower. I still don't quite know how to spell it. But I'm not a great speller. And when I started as a trial attorney, I have a huge dose of imposter syndrome. I'm finally feeling like I'm getting out of it. But then as soon as I feel like I'm getting out of it, it crushes me again, right? And so I sort of, went to law school and I was like, well, this won't work. I'll finally be exposed for the, first the person I am. I'm not going to get through it. Then I succeeded in law school. Okay, well, it'll all crash down around me at the bar, right? Okay, I get through that. It'll all crash down on me once I start practicing law. I won't be able to do it, right? And so then I'm practicing law as a young public defender. I'm doing fine. I'm doing well. And then I went to try my first homicide. And, Mallory is a trial attorney. You know this. When you're in the heat of trial, you're passing a lot of notes, right? You're back and forth. Ask this question. Sticky notes are everywhere. And you handwrite those, right? Because you can't, a little bit more now, we maybe G-chat and stuff, but usually it's handwritten.
I've still got the sticky notes everywhere.
Exactly, because you don't want to be on G-chat. It's just a lot. I do say with my Apple Watch, I'll get like a message, and that's a great way it'll pop up. And someone's like, object to that, kind of thing. It's like, oh, thank you, friend who's in the gallery, right? Or listening on WebEx now. But and I was sort of like, okay, this will be the time. I'll try this 2-week homicide with this really famous, amazing trial attorney, Fernando Freire, who's one of my dearest friends and one of my mentors. And, and he'll realize I'm an idiot because I can't spell received or cauliflower. If that came up in a murder case, sort of doubt it, but it could. I'll spell cauliflower like an idiot, and he'll be like, Hannah's an idiot, right? And so we get through the trial, and there were times I wrote notes, and you're just so in it, you don't think, like, I just spelled receive incorrectly, right? Or whatever word it is. And at the end, we're having a drink, kind of waiting for the verdict or after the trial, and I was like, I'm so sorry about my spelling. Like, I feel like such an idiot. I'm glad you were able to read everything. And he looked at me, and he's like, your spelling? He's like, some of those notes you passed me were these great questions that I hadn't thought of, or just that question I needed, or just that reminder. I never noticed the spelling. I could read it all, and it just was this moment of remembering, like, not everyone is as hypercritical of you, Hannah, as you are of yourself, right? And so now I'm just, more comfortable with myself. I was like closing on 12 years of practicing law. And I just tell people, like, look, we're going to hang. I can't spell very well. Like, sometimes so poorly that even spell checks, like, what is that? I don't know. Unrecognized word, And it's just, whatever. It's just me. So
jumping ahead, obviously you graduated college, graduated law school, and you end up with the public defender's office. Aside from your fascination with prison, what led you down the path of public service? I've always been an underdog person, whether it was the person being bullied when I was a kid, or, just every situation I wanted to fight for the underdog. It was a roundabout path to law school. I mean, I knew I wanted to work in the prison industrial complex. I honestly thought initially I wanted to be a social worker and do felon reentry, specifically potentially in the indigenous community, because growing up around a lot of Athabascan folks and seeing the kind of over-incarceration of indigenous Alaskans, that was a real interest of mine. And so then I discovered that I loved advocacy and the power of the courtroom. So when I decided to go to law school, I was like, I'm going to sue prisons. That's the way to make the change, make them pay, right? That's how we get to kind of prison abolition and some of these big ideas that I read Angela Davis's Our Prison is Obsolete when I was 16, and just my mind was blown, right? Like, we're going to do it. Like, we could do this. And then I
interned with the public defender's office and I fell in love with advocacy. And I've always loved clients. I've always loved that. Selfishly, just that time with them. I mean, one of the things I've missed the most about COVID is not being in jails and prisons, because I love that no internet, no emails chiming. It's just me and my client, like dialed in for that 3 hours behind the prison door or whatever it is. And I miss that because now I'm on Zoom and the emails still pop up. And in some ways it's nice because my clients see me. You're not allowed to wear your normal clothes. You can't wear your jewelry at prisons. And they don't, they see a glimpse in a safe way. Of course, I feel safe with my clients almost always, but they see into my house, into my space. Like I've gotten to show my dogs, right? Like I hope that's okay. I don't think any prison officials would be mad about that I've lifted a Scotty dog up to show a client. Because for some of these people, I've known them for years, right? And they hear about my dogs, they hear about my life a little bit, but. So I fell in love with trial work, candidly, and I was like, this is what I want to do, and I see how I can make a change on an individual level within the system. I later, as you know from my resume, went into policy work. I sort of got burnt out from being a trial attorney after 7 years as a public defender, and I thought I got a little bit back to my roots, and I was like, maybe I need to try policy, try systemic change. I did that for 2 legislative sessions. I really loved it. I'm very proud of what we accomplished as a team, not just me. Juvenile life without parole reform, after the Miller-Montgomery decisions in 2016, we ended mass seclusion of children in juvenile justice facilities. We, made it easier for juveniles to expunge their records. All of these reforms that I'm really proud of. Candidly, I missed the client communication. I missed the courtroom. And so then I shifted back into trial attorney work after a few years off.
Have you ever thought that legislation or being a legislator or being in the political realm might be in your future, since you were able to affect such enormous change in the juvenile sentencing arena?
I think I would be a terrible politician, Bonnie, because I practice radical candor. So I say it exactly how it is. Not to mention, I'm not an expert in very many things other than juvenile justice. So they'd be like, it's time to talk about fracking. And I'd be like, oh, I better pull up that one New York Times article that I read that was very informative, right? I just I'm really not a jack of all trades. And I like that about my life, that I can have this sort of hyper-focused passion. And I always say to people I mentor, you pick your thing and I'll pick my thing, and I'll have my cohort and you have your cohort, and we'll make change, because, the little tiny incremental change I can make in my one career, my one little life, right? If we all have those passion projects. And legislators, it's so important, and they do such amazing work. I just sit back and I'm amazed. How can you know so much about so many things? And they used to have to shake. I was a germaphobe pre-COVID, so all that handshaking, I'm like, I'm out right there. Like, so I don't think politics are in my future.
Tell us a little bit about your journey from the public defender's office now to where you are as the founder of your own law firm.
Yeah, I want to say, for all those people who maybe haven't started networking yet, I want to tell you that I didn't start networking as a lawyer until I'd been practicing for 5 years. And there's a few reasons behind that. First of all, I just didn't know any better. Being a professional wasn't modeled for me growing up. Although my father was successful in his career and my mother is an artist and a creative and a homemaker and an amazing person, they didn't have social networks. I didn't see them network, go to professional outings, things like that. I also, it was modeled to me that you got a government job and you sort of stuck with it until you retired. When I started to realize maybe I don't want to be a public defender for 25, 30 years, even though it's incredible the people who do that, I sort of looked up and realized, oh my gosh, I don't know anyone who's not in this little world of mine. And I also didn't go to law school here, which is huge, right? And so I always laugh now, here we are 12 years into practice, my DU friends think I went to DU and my CU friends think I went to CU. And I'm always like, I didn't go to law school here. It's such a, almost everybody, as you know, is kind of from these amazing schools. And so I looked up, I kind of didn't have a cohort from law school. That's all in California. I didn't have a cohort. I wasn't part of the women's bar, part of any diversity bars. And I was like, I've got to network. And so I had just met my now husband at the time. And, I was like, I've got to start networking. And so I started going to these events and I wouldn't meet anyone. I wouldn't talk to anyone. And my husband, I would come home, I'd be like, no one talked to me. And he'd be like, what? No one? And, I'm like, pretty much. I'd try to maybe break into a conversation. They'd all say hello to me and then it would get insular again, right? And so, but I think what my point there is just keep showing up, because now here I am 12 years later, I'm on the women's bar. Almost any event that I went to in the legal community through Cobalt, through other organizations, I'm going to know somebody. And I also will tell you that from my experience, I'm the person who's always bringing someone with me who maybe doesn't network as much, or drawing people in who are maybe new to the crowd, because I know how the legal community can feel insular just because we're so happy to see each other, right? It's not that Mallory and I don't want to meet other people. It's that we can't wait to talk amongst ourselves. So all that to be said, that's sort of a long answer to your question there. I didn't have any options to get a job outside the public defender's office. I applied for jobs at about 5 years and just didn't get any responses. I started networking, really started putting myself out there and, getting re-engaged with things I cared about in the community that weren't public defender related. And that was how I was able to then transition into the policy job, because I built that network. Similarly, when my policy position, the nonprofit lost funding and we all got laid off. And then the people I had networked with in that time was then how I got to Johnson & Klein, a law firm in Boulder. And that I spent 2 years there as an associate. And then I opened my own law firm 2.5 years ago. And so that's sort of my path.
Was there a time when you were welcomed that was memorable to you in this law profession, trying to have some recognition so that you can network?
Yes. I'm going to do another name drop here, because Patty Jarboski is just one of my heroes and one of the most incredible people in the bar. I have a very strong memory of being at an event early on where Patty was sort of like, what's your deal? And when I told her that I was just starting to network, and she was sort of like, okay, you've got to meet this person, you've got to meet this person. So that really stands out. Other people who were, and I also found pretty quickly, like maybe the big event, the holiday party is not the best first event to go to all by yourself.
Yes.
Maybe a committee meeting over the lunch hour, because then, everybody's excited to have another worker bee and they're going to welcome you into the fold. So I also very quickly kind of found that the smaller venues were easier to make those connections. And then I just started to know people. Then your smaller group and you go to the big event and there's your crowd. And yeah.
Did you choose a mentor at any particular stage?
So I have...
Or did someone choose you?
I have a number of mentors. I'm very lucky in that sense. For the first 5 years of my career, my only mentors were within the public defender's office, incredible humans and litigators. I have maintained some of those relationships and I keep them on kind of my personal board of directors. I also now, I have many different mentors for kind of different situations. I recently had a conflict with someone that I work directly with, and I wanted to have a healthy conversation with that person and kind of nip the issue before it festered, especially over Zoom. It's so easy. We're all cutting each other off and it's hard to read body language. And so I called a specific mentor who I really appreciate how she builds relationships. And I was like, how do you recommend this? Similarly, I have a very good friend, not a lawyer, who I think of as a mentor kind of in my personal life. Like, she's the person I go to when I'm not being present with my husband because I'm stressed with work. And like, she's the one, I kind of want to have a marriage like hers and 40 years sort of thing. So I think of it as my personal board of directors, and kind of, I don't have a kind of someone who fits everything. I do have a mentor through the Women's Bar Association, and that's been an amazing through the program, the mentor program there, and that's been a great thing.
I love the term personal board of directors. If this is really resonating with someone and, maybe they're a younger lawyer, they don't maybe have a personal board of directors. Maybe like us, they came from out of state, something along those lines, got into public service and stayed there. What advice would you give to someone who is looking to network and to build this personal board of mentors?
I would say be direct about your needs. There are times when I go to folks, even before they're on my personal board of directors, and I just put out front, like now in this Zoom time, hi, so-and-so, so nice to see you at X, Y, and Z or hear you speak. I would love 15 minutes of your time over Zoom to brainstorm this issue that I'm having. That way, they go into the meeting knowing what you want to address. It's not sort of, why is this person on my calendar, right? So I would just do that. If you see someone in court really addressing a client well and you're struggling with client relationships, or you see someone who seems to be bringing in a ton of business and you're struggling with business development, or whatever it is, be formal with what you want from that person. Because I get these emails sometimes, it's like, I'd love to have a coffee or have a Zoom. And again, I go into the meeting and it's sort of like, I have to remind myself, did I ask for this meeting or did they, right? And again, I'm happy to do it, but I love when someone sort of says, I'm thinking of starting a nonprofit. I want to talk to you about the top 5 steps you think I take, or I want to get into leadership. I'd love to talk to you about your favorite books, or I'm having an ethics dilemma. And so I love some guidance when people reach out. So I'd say start slow. You don't have to have this big, I built my big group of mentors over years. So start slow and just approach people and then formally ask them, can I come to you when these interpersonal issues come up with people, because this was really helpful? Most people are going to say yes. And if they don't have the bandwidth for it, then better for you to know that up front so you can find someone else to fill that role.
That's great advice. Let's transition to talk a little bit about the nonprofit that you co-founded, Lyric. Tell us about that.
Thanks. Yeah, Lyric is, I started in 2009 with Michael Juba, who's one of my dear friends. We litigate a lot together. We run Lyric together. We were baby public defenders in the same courtroom, so we really grew up together in the legal world. And Michael and I were in the juvenile unit of the the juvenile public defenders unit in Denver. And, we just started to see all of these children who had interactions with the police and they had no idea what their rights are. And so we were like, wouldn't it be great as sort of an extracurricular activity for us if we started teaching young people about their rights before they entered the system, or hopefully they never enter the system, as just, active and engaged citizens who need to understand the Constitution. And so we really started as a pretty hodgepodge, just grassroots. We'd show up and come up with different flyers and things and just talk to whomever would listen. We have since, in 2015, we became a 501c3. We are a part of the curriculum in 65 schools across Colorado, after-school programs. Pre-COVID, we taught between 5 and 7 presentations a week. And our presentations are 55 minutes, as long as a class period in school. And it's really kind of our tagline is bringing the law to life in Colorado classrooms. And so the whole goal of a Lyric presentation is to hear from a lawyer, from a law student, how the 5th, 6th, and 4th Amendment apply in a young person's life, from police encounters, consensual searches, right to remain silent. The statistics and the data are startling. The statistics say that 90% of young people who are interrogated by the police waive their Miranda rights to remain and speak instead of remain silent. I mean, the rates are high for adults, high 60s, low 70s. A lot of adults do this as well. But it's so fun to teach a Lyric presentation and see that light bulb, like, wait, I don't have to talk? Like, really? I have that? It's empowering for young people to know that. And especially, I'm not a parent, and I don't plan to be a parent, but I know a lot of people who are parents, and people have truth is a big part of raising a child. I understand that, right? And I understand that with my nephews and my godkids and everything. And, so kids are trained, like, tell the truth and it's better. And cops know to use that, right? And parents, you should tell them did you do this? Like, you should tell them what you did. And so it's really great to meet kids where they are in the classrooms and after school programs and, teach them about their rights. We just changed the name of Lyric from Learn Your Rights in Colorado to Learn Your Rights in the Community to expand, hopefully, outside of Colorado. And so it's growing and it's exciting. It's a really fun thing. It is a passion project. I will tell you that, on average, I work about 7 hours a week on Lyric, which is a big kind of unpaid job, but I love it.
Is there outreach to Greater Colorado with Lyric?
Great question. We have tried, and we have done some work in El Paso County and in Larimer County. It has been hard for us to engage volunteers. First of all, in El Paso, our volunteers keep getting put on the bench. It's like, stop getting promoted, volunteers. We need you at Lyric for this unpaid volunteer gig, right? But, it's harder. First of all, I think that our lawyers outside of the metro area are there's so much to do because there's fewer lawyers, right? And so they're tapped in so many different directions. And so it's just been hard for us to engage with the schools because I'm so far away, because that's a lot of just administrative, meeting with administrators and talking to teachers. It's harder to get done out of the metro area. Eventually, we would love to have an executive director. Not me. It's not my dream for myself. I would love to hire particularly a diverse candidate. I mean, candidly, the majority of the students we reach are Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. I think it's very important once Lyric ever has the money to pay someone that person reflect the community that we serve. So as soon as we have an executive director, that will be a huge thing. A huge part of the job is expanding.
Are you looking to any Greater Colorado entities to try to be an outreach for you, or is that just in the wind right now?
It's really just finding the right, if we have someone who's really dedicated. For a while, we had someone up in the mountains who wanted, kind of moved from Denver and wanted to do it up there. And while she was up there, we had some programming. It's really just finding the people who want to take it on and bring it to their communities. It's helpful to have an insider because it's a lot harder for me to sort of email, like, I'm from this organization based in Denver, as compared to, I'm your public defender downtown Salida, right? Like, and we want to come to your school with this cool program. It's an easier conversation. So
I've heard you say a number of times that you run a mission-based law firm. What does that mean?
So when I was left to start my own law firm, I really took the time to think about the things I loved doing in not all these jobs, these 3 really great jobs and even some internships from law school. And I thought to myself, I have the power to create the culture of one, right? I always laugh that I either have the best, depending on the day, or the worst boss. This is just a side note. You can feel free to edit this out. But Prof Law allegedly has Breakfast Burrito Friday. And it's this joke.
So does Foster Graham. It's a great thing.
But someone actually probably buys them for you. I just think all day, and I say to my husband in the hallway now that I work from home, it's Breakfast Burrito Friday. And he's like, Hannah, it's 3 on Friday. And there's no breakfast burritos in sight. So I rarely actually get it together. So it's sort of this reminder of, like, if the culture is bad at Prof Law, I have like one woman to blame, right? But when I started the firm, I sat down. I have a mission statement for my firm. Again, it's a mission statement for one person, but still, it was really important to me that I start with the right kind of ethos and mindset. And one of the first things I decided is I'm not going to take cases I'm not going to take the work that I don't love just because I need work because I'm starting out. And one of the funniest things that happened kind of week 2, I'd opened my own law firm. Here I am, open for business. And I got a call or referral for a DUI. I haven't tried a DUI for 10 years, and I didn't like them much when I tried them. I don't think I was particularly talented at DUI defense. I don't try DUIs. So I referred the case to someone who's fantastic and does DUIs. And that person then called me. I think there's a mistake because I just got a referral from Prof Law, and Prof Law has no clients. And I'm like, part of my mission statement is I'm not going to take work that doesn't serve me. It's not good for the client. It's not good for the community. And I trust if you refer work comes back to you, the work you want to do. I also love to do pro bono work. I love to represent indigent defendants. I became a lawyer to serve people who justice is deserved, and they lack maybe the power or the money or the authority. And I wanted to help those people gain access to justice and to freedom. And so my law firm, 40% of my work is alternate defense counsel work, so indigent defendants. I only take juvenile homicides and sexual assaults and juveniles who have been direct filed. I will every once in a while take an adult homicide as well, but I only take the big litigation because that's what I love. I'm not the right person for an alternate defense counsel drug case. Like, I just don't like lower level cases for that work. I'd rather really dig in, really know the client, do really good mitigation. I love mitigating. I love getting to know clients' families. That's the work that serves me. Then about, 35 to 40, depending on how busy things are, percent of my work is private criminal defense. I have some kind of areas that I really like to take for adults. And I do a lot of juveniles charged with sexual offenses, violent offenses, things like that. I don't take a lot of adult cases. Again, I have this robust network. I can give the best referral list in the history of the world to someone who calls me that I can't help, right? And I'm just not afraid to do that. This week I got a call, a big retainer for Proff Law, someone who needed help with a federal pre-file indictment. I do a ton of pre-file work on the sex assault side of my private practice. I love that. But I don't do federal work, really, and I don't do this work. And although I'm not all that busy right now, I still referred the case out to someone I respect and who does it better than me, because that client deserves that. So I really think, I hope, and I do see that it comes back around, that people, you send them the big case that's just right for them, and then the case comes across their desk that's really just more right for you than for them, and they think of you, right? And I love that about the legal community. And then a solid 20% of my practice is purely pro bono, and that's where the kind of mission, I think the alternate defense counsel and the pro bono being 50% of my practice or more, is where I get the mission-based, right? And there I take cases from sort of multiple sources, and I always have a lot of pro bono work. I have a really hard time saying no to pro bono work. I'm like, if you have a sob story and you email it to me, like, don't abuse that. Like, don't use this podcast to abuse that, because I will probably, I will sometimes get an email and not realize the email was sent to others, and I'll take the case and be like, oh, I got that email, and I said no, and I'm like, oh, smart, sort of, but also it's such great work. So I volunteer a lot with The Light, representing women who were human trafficking survivors, some of whom are still in the midst of being trafficked. I represent children, helping them get their records expunged and off the sex offender registry through the Colorado Juvenile Defender Center, which is my old employer. I right now have an allocation of parental rights case through Metro Volunteer Lawyers. I know we have a family lawyer in the room. I know she's like blessing me, which I need. It's been a tough case for me, and it's not my world, so I've had to learn so much. But luckily, they gave me an incredible mentor through Metro Volunteer Lawyers will give you a mentor if you take a case that you don't know how to take. So Mindy from Chancho Brown is my angel in the background of telling me how to practice family law, thank goodness. And I do other things too. That I represent protesters. I just closed a protesters case through the Black Lives Matter protest through the National Lawyers Guild. And I love it. I love doing pro bono work. It's really nice to not have to think about billing and just litigate. And, I recently said to someone on a pro bono case, like, I know I'm not getting paid, but like, I'm also not going to cut any corners. If we have to go to this week-long allocation of parental rights hearing, like, I'll figure it out. I'm going to show up. I've got, luckily, Mindy's 1,000 times smarter than me in the background telling me, how to do things. So that's what a mission-based law firm means for Proff Law.
So in addition to your passion for pro bono work, you're also very passionate about mentorship in the legal community. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. But I need my board of directors to survive. And I also feel like I need to give back by being on other people's board of directors. Right now I have, and actually for the past few years, I've had this situation where I have a DU mentee in every class. So I have a 3L, a 2L, and a 1L. And so I always take a student through the DU mentorship program. One thing I will tell you about this, and I don't know if DU will like this, me telling you this, it's an amazing program. Get involved if you're not. But I emailed them and just said, because I got matched with this corporate lawyer one year, and she's amazing and she's thriving. She's out in the world at a big firm, but we had nothing in I couldn't really help her. I was like, well, I kind of know a person you might want to know more than me, right? And so I said to DU, if I'm going to do this, I'm not a DU alum, so I'm not doing it for alumni engagement. I am an adjunct professor there. I love DU, but, I want to do it if you can match me with students who at least think they want to do work with juveniles or criminal defense or something in my world. So right now I have 3 amazing women who are, again, 3L, 2L, 1L, Paloma, Katie, and Raylan. And first of all, the more mentees you have, the easier it gets, because I kind of push them off on each other. I'm like, you should ask Paloma since she's a 3L now, and I was a 3L 14 years ago.
You're not pushing them off. You're training them how to mentor the next generation.
I'll send them this podcast, and they'll love that characterization. Right. I'm helping them. I'm co-mentoring alongside them. Right. I also mentor through camp. The great program that Ryan Payton runs that's just phenomenal. And I have a really wonderful woman that I co-mentor. I mentor alongside another lawyer right now. And I get asked out a lot on mentor. I would say that I'm on multiple people's boards of directors. And I'm also, always I'm always hooking people up with my network. I love to do that. Like, oh, you need to know this person. You two will be perfect for each other, and really being thoughtful about that. I think I want to highlight being thoughtful about that, because sometimes people delegate some mentorship to me where I'm in the meeting and I'm like, why am I here? I think it might just be that the lawyer who sent this person to me just didn't want to deal a little, And so it's like, if I'm going to send, you need to meet Mallory or you need to meet Bonnie, it's going to be because I have some real concrete reasons, and I'm going to do an introduction email and get them excited to kind of connect. Because for me, the broader my network has become, the more diverse my network has become, the better I am at referring, at getting work done, and just at having a really happy life, because the bigger your community is. I love being a lawyer, and, so it's great to know other lawyers.
So as we're winding down, one of my favorite things about you, aside from you being a brilliant lawyer and just a really genuine and fun person, you are a wonderful storyteller, and you have an incredible bank of hilarious stories. So would you share one of your favorite stories with our listeners?
Oh, man. One of my favorite stories. I really do have quite the arsenal of stories. I'll tell this one. You could feel free to edit it out. I love Tracy Chapman. I love Tracy Chapman kind of more than anything that ever existed. She's so amazing. And Tracy Chapman was just making the rounds in the media because she sang talking about a revolution on some late night shows leading up to the election. I almost said leading up to the revolution. Revolution. And
Freud.
I would say that, although I don't think talking about a revolution is Tracy's best song, I will say, I get why other people do. It's an amazing song. And so I have followed Tracy on tour. I'm like a diehard fan, right? I know all of these facts about her. When I moved to San Francisco, I went to the Makeout Room, which is this bar in the Mission, and I was like, I'll give $100 to every bartender working if Tracy shows up to play a show, right? Because she'll sometimes show up. She's famous for showing up there. And if you text me at this number, I will pay I will come with money, right? I just love her. And so I've been thinking about these stories that I also know that Tracy Chapman is an introvert and she doesn't like to be recognized. She doesn't like kind of fans. I used to, when I'd go to her shows and there would be the people who are like, I love you. Like she kind of hates that, right? You could see it. It's written all over her that she hates it. So I have had two situations where I have interacted with Tracy Chapman and not alerted her that I was such a fan. One time she was lost and looking for this place called Secret Sushi in San Francisco in a neighborhood I lived in. And we walked 2 whole blocks together.
Wow.
While I showed her where Secret Sushi was, and I didn't out myself as a fan because I knew that she would feel weird. I mean, was it like the best 2 blocks of my life?
Score.
Yes. And another time that's pretty funny from a law school perspective or lawyer perspective is I was one time acting as a fair housing tester for massive fair housing litigation in California. And what you do when you do that is you show up. I am a white woman, Jewish woman, who is, and I don't have any apparent physical disabilities, right? Like we talked about, maybe neurodiverse, but I'm not in a wheelchair or anything like that. So I would show up with another volunteer as kind of the nice white couple to apply for the apartment, and then they would later send different folks, depending on the issues that the housing place was potentially having. They'd send them, and then they would see if we got the same kind of response from the landlord. And this was part of this was a volunteer opportunity. And so I was in character. And I'm not much of an actress, but I take things like this very seriously. And Tracy Chapman came out of nowhere right near where I was doing this fair housing testing. And she was like, "Don't I know you?" We had this like kind of moment where, because she had another question. Anyway, all that to be said, I played the role and I stayed in character for housing testing, and I didn't. So I feel like we're almost friends. I mean, I love Angela Davis. She's friends with Angela Davis. Like, I almost feel like we've run in these same orbits, but it hasn't connected. I don't know if that's the best story, but Tracy's been on my mind.
So we've talked a little bit about where you've come from, where you are now. So we have to ask, what's next for Hannah Proff?
That's a great question. Mallory, I have a really hard time answering it candidly. Not that long ago, my partner, my husband said, when Prof Law turns 5 or something along those lines. And I said, well, how do we know Prof Law is going to turn 5? Like, I have a little bit of maybe commitment phobia. Even though I love my job, I'm always sort of like, I don't know if I'll be a lawyer in 5 years, even though I have no other plans. So I think the way I can answer that is, and I thought about this leading up to this, I wish I could tell you I wanted to have this particular job or wanted something. But instead, I'll tell you that my goal in 5 years is to be living the same way I'm living now, which is, I think, really highlighted by this Toni Morrison quote. I adore Toni Morrison. I think she's brilliant. And I love this quote that she says. I'm going to read it. I tell my students, when you get those jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you have to free someone else. If you have power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a candy grab bag candy game. Anyway, it's just, I love that idea that I have so much power in the world. And even though I've faced my difficulties, I spend a lot of time unpacking the power that I do have, and the little bit of influence that I have. And my goal right now is to lift up other lawyers from diverse backgrounds, lift up law students from diverse backgrounds, mentor young people. I forgot to mention I also mentor high school students, particularly Black, Brown, and Indigenous young people. And so, again, I'm so lucky to be free. I think of that every day, both free from Alaska and free physically, and free from some other things, that I want to bring that. I want to continue to harness that power and privilege I have and pass it on.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're such a powerful person in this world. Thank you for all of your work and your inspiration and your welcoming way to take on other people and help them. That's impressive, particularly when you said you had some difficulty with that yourself when you were just entering, and that Patty Jarzobski and others had reach out to you, and that's what you were waiting for, and now you're doing it for others. How grand. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Hannah. This has been wonderful.
This has been Our Voices. For more information on today's guest, or to get involved, please check out the CBA podcast page at cobar.org/podcast. That's cobar.org/podcast. This podcast series was created by members of the Colorado and Denver Bar Associations. Our Voices is a collaborative effort of the EDI Joint Steering Committee messaging team, including Mallory Revel, Linda Moss, Bonnie Schriner, Mallory Hasbrook, Mo Watson, Mario Trimble, Courtney Holm, and Emmy Lopez, with our CBA Communications Team Director, Heather Folker, and Manager, Charles McGarvey. Our recording engineer is Rick Ponteleone of Lionsbridge Recording. Our producer and editor is Courtney Holm, with theme and introduction by Mario Trimble. This podcast is made possible because of the support of the Colorado and Denver Bar Associations. On behalf of all of us, thanks for listening to Our Voices.